Japan could have nuclear weapons within 3 years if it decided to pursue them today. And if that happened, pretty much every security calculation in Asia would need to be thrown out and rewritten from scratch. This video is going to walk you through what changes for China, North Korea, the US alliance, South Korea, and the global nuclear order. Some of it is obvious, a lot of it isn't. First, let's get one thing out of the way. Japan going nuclear isn't some wild thought experiment cooked up on the internet. This is a conversation happening at the highest levels of government right now. In December 2025, a senior security advisor to Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi publicly stated his personal view that Japan should have nuclear weapons. That the Prime Minister herself has hinted at revising Japan's long-standing 3 non-nuclear principles, the rules that have kept Japan from possessing, producing, or allowing nuclear weapons on its soil since 1967. Her former defense minister has made the most explicit public call yet for Japan to acquire nuclear-powered submarines. This is no longer fringe thinking in Tokyo. It's being discussed in Parliament. And the late Henry Kissinger, someone who spent his entire career studying nuclear strategy, warned in 2023 that Japan was, in his words, heading toward becoming a nuclear power within 5 years. So why now, after 8 decades of Japan being arguably the most committed non-nuclear state on the planet? Because the neighborhood has changed. Japan is surrounded by 3 nuclear-armed neighbors: China, which has been rapidly doubling its nuclear arsenal; Russia, which shares a disputed border with Japan and has been making nuclear threats with disturbing regularity; and North Korea, which has been testing missiles capable of reaching Japanese cities for years. Japan's own 2025 Defense White Paper describes this as a security environment unlike anything the country has faced since World War II. The US nuclear umbrella, the promise that America would defend Japan with nuclear force if necessary, is the thing that has kept Japan non-nuclear this entire time. But analysts at places like the Stimson Center and the Asia-Pacific Leadership Network have noted that Japan and South Korea are increasingly uncertain whether that umbrella still holds. The question isn't paranoia, it's arithmetic. Would an American president risk a nuclear strike on US soil to defend Tokyo? That's the question that keeps Japanese defense planners awake. Here's where it gets technical and genuinely startling. Japan is what's called a latent nuclear power. It has everything needed to build nuclear weapons except the political decision to do so. The US government's own non-proliferation assessments have concluded that no non-nuclear country on Earth is better positioned to break out and develop advanced nuclear weapons than Japan. The numbers tell the story. As of 2024, Japan holds approximately 44.4 metric tons of separated plutonium, the world's 5th largest civilian stockpile. About 8.6 metric tons of that is stored on Japanese soil. The rest sits in reprocessing facilities in the UK and France. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, roughly 8 kilograms of plutonium constitutes enough material for a single nuclear device. Japan's domestic stockpile alone could theoretically yield over 1,000 weapons. Japan also holds around 1.8 metric tons of highly enriched uranium, one of the largest stockpiles among non-nuclear states. And in October 2025, Japan Nuclear Fuel Limited resumed uranium enrichment operations at its Rokusho facility for the first time since 2014, a step that non-proliferation analysts immediately flagged. Chinese nuclear experts, analyzing this same data in late 2025, concluded that Japan could produce nuclear weapons in under 3 years. Some assessments put an initial emergency capability much sooner than that, measured in months rather than years. What would actually take time is the hard part: miniaturizing a warhead, mating it to a delivery system. building command and control infrastructure, and standing up a professional nuclear force. France, a country with serious industrial capability, spent about 7 years doing all of that after its first nuclear test. But Japan's industrial and technological base is significantly more advanced than France's was in the 1960s. The James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies and other research bodies have assessed that once political constraints are lifted, and Japan's pace of development could be faster than most historical precedents. China's reaction would be immediate and severe, and this is probably where the most significant changes happen. Beijing has always protested even Japan's discussions about nuclear weapons, framing it as evidence of dangerous militarism. A nuclear-armed Japan would be China's worst strategic nightmare in its neighborhood. Right now, China maintains nuclear dominance over Japan, a country it has territorial disputes with over the Senkaku Islands and views as a key node in what Beijing calls the U.S. encirclement strategy. A Japanese nuclear deterrent would change that calculation completely. China would face a scenario it has specifically worked to prevent: a U.S. ally with an independent nuclear capability, operating from a string of islands that effectively form a barrier along China's eastern coastline. For Chinese military planners, the strategic problem isn't just Japan itself. It's that a nuclear Japan makes any Chinese military action in the region, including against Taiwan, exponentially more dangerous. The almost certain Chinese response would be accelerated nuclear expansion, which China is already doing. Beijing has been rapidly expanding its arsenal, and analysts believe it could reach 1,500 warheads by 2035. Japanese nuclearization would almost certainly accelerate that timeline. It would also push China toward a hair-trigger alert posture, raising the risk of miscalculation during any crisis. There's also the economic dimension. Japan and China are deeply intertwined trade partners, and the economic fallout from the diplomatic rupture that would follow Japanese nuclearization would be significant for both sides. North Korea's nuclear program is arguably the single biggest driver behind Japan's current nuclear conversation. Pyongyang has missiles capable of reaching Japan. That's not a theoretical threat. It's a demonstrated capability. North Korea has tested intercontinental ballistic missiles with ranges covering the U.S. mainland, and its shorter-range arsenal is specifically designed to target Japan and South Korea. A nuclear-armed Japan fundamentally rewrites North Korea's deterrence equation. Right now, Kim Jong-un can threaten Japan with nuclear attack while facing only conventional retaliation from Tokyo. That calculus disappears the moment Japan has its own deterrent. This could go one of two ways. It could make North Korea more cautious, or it could push Pyongyang toward more aggressive first strike posturing, calculating it needs to use its weapons before Japan's are fully operational. South Korea is the other major domino. Public polling in South Korea already shows considerable support for an independent nuclear capability, support that is much higher than in Japan. If Japan goes nuclear, the pressure on Seoul to follow would be enormous, both from domestic politics and from pure strategic logic. Analysts at Foreign Policy magazine published an assessment in late 2025 concluding that it is no longer a question of if, but when, Japan and South Korea acquire independent nuclear deterrents. A Japanese decision to go nuclear could compress South Korea's timeline dramatically. This is the most complicated piece, and it's genuinely uncertain. On one hand, Japan going nuclear could be read as a failure of American deterrence, a U.S. ally that lost faith in the nuclear umbrella and decided to go it alone. That would be a significant blow to U.S. credibility globally, not just in Asia. If Japan doesn't trust the U.S. to defend it, why would South Korea or Taiwan or NATO members in Eastern Europe? On the other hand, some strategists argue the opposite, that a nuclear Japan would actually strengthen the alliance by making Japan a more equal partner in regional deterrence, rather than a dependent client. The Stimson Center has noted that if Japan decided to move toward nuclear sharing or allow U.S. strategic weapons on its soil, U.S. forces Japan's force posture would require complete reevaluation. What's clear is that the U.S.-Japan alliance would need to be fundamentally renegotiated. The current arrangement, where Japan provides bases and financial contributions and the U.S. provides the nuclear umbrella, would be replaced by something more complex and potentially more contentious. Trump administration tariff disputes already strained the alliance in 2025. Add a Japanese nuclear decision to that dynamic, and the relationship becomes significantly harder to manage. There's also the NPT question. Japan is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and going nuclear would mean withdrawing from it, just as North Korea did in 2003. That would have consequences for Japan's standing in international institutions and could ripple into trade and diplomatic relationships far beyond Asia. Here's the piece of this that often gets glossed over in strategic analysis. Japan is the only country in history to have been attacked with nuclear weapons. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not abstract histories in Japan. The survivors, called hibakusha, have been the backbone of one of the world's most powerful nuclear disarmament movements for 80 years. A 2020 poll found that roughly 75% of the Japanese public supported a global ban on nuclear weapons. The numbers have shifted somewhat since. A poll conducted in Hiroshima in August 2025 found that 53% of respondents believe nuclear deterrence plays a necessary role in security. That's a significant shift, but it still doesn't represent a public mandate to go nuclear. Any Japanese government pursuing nuclear weapons would be doing so against deep cultural resistance, historical memory, and a pacifist constitutional tradition. That's not nothing. Political feasibility is a real constraint that no amount of plutonium stockpile overcomes. So, what's the honest answer to the question this video started with? If Japan woke up tomorrow with nuclear weapons, the region would not be more stable. It would be more dangerous in the short term, not because Japan is an irresponsible actor, but because rapid shifts in nuclear balance create uncertainty, and uncertainty is where miscalculation happens. China would accelerate its buildup. North Korea would reassess its posture. South Korea would face enormous internal pressure to follow. The US-Japan alliance would need to be completely renegotiated. In the longer term, some serious analysts genuinely believe a nuclear Japan, operating under the US alliance framework, could produce a more stable deterrent structure than the current one, where Japan is exposed and the credibility of US guarantees is increasingly questioned. That's not an unreasonable argument, but it comes with enormous transition risk. What is clear is that this question is no longer hypothetical. The debate is happening in Tokyo right now. Japan has the material, the technology, and a growing strategic rationale. What it doesn't have yet is the political decision. Whether that decision comes in 5 years, 10 years, or never, the rest of Asia is already behaving as if it might come. That's the world we're in.